Welcome, everyone. I'm here with Sheena Symington. She's the director of the Electrosensitive Society, where she helps people who are electrosensitive. She has a background in biological and environmental sciences and has been researching chemical and electromagnetic pollutants and their effects on natural and human ecosystems for many years. She also works as a research associate with Professor Emeritus Dr. Magda Havas and gives talks related to electromagnetic radiation hygiene on how to educate people so that they can maintain an electromagnetically clean environment and repair and heal their health. I'm Theodora Scarrato, Executive Director with Environmental Health Trust. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sheena.
Thank you for having me.
So I was so impressed with your presentation at the EMF Medical Conference 2021 and all the work that you've been doing over the years. I have a feeling you've been a part of many of the protective actions and the Petersboro tips on electromagnetic sensitivity and other actions that communities are taking to educate and raise awareness and help protect people who are struggling with sensitivity to electromagnetic radiation. So I'm so glad that you could come on today to tell us more about what you do, what's happening and what people can do to protect their health.
Thanks, Theodora. So how to advocate for persons who have electromagnetic hypersensitivity. So that is when people are really debilitated by electromagnetic fields and frequencies. And as Theodora said, I presented this at the Medical Conference 2021. And you can go to their website and get more information on this amazing conference. So much information. And I really encourage you to go on, and you can actually purchase the slides. They're going to be available very soon. So, doesn't want me to advance for some reason. There we go. All right. So this is a picture of all the different devices that emit radio frequency radiation. And most people can't hear it or feel it, but some people who are electrohypersensitive can feel the frequencies that these devices emanate. So if you, Dr. Havas created a PDF that turns the sounds that these create from the radio frequency into sound. And I'm going to show you what that sounds like if you were able to hear it. Whoops. Sorry about that. Baby monitor. And this is a Wi-Fi router. Cordless telephone. Cell phone. And the mother's baby monitor. Some homes would sound like this. It's just to give you an idea of how much disruption an individual with EHS can feel. So there are many symptoms for EHS. They're all listed here. And some people say, how can those radio frequency radiation devices or EMF create all of these symptoms? And really it suppresses your immune system function. So whatever your kind of weak link is the symptom that you'll have. What causes EHS? There's many common precursors, 5 of which are, 1 is the physical trauma, so trauma to the central nervous system through whiplash or concussion. 2 would be a chemical exposure, predisposes you to becoming EHS through pesticides, metals, drugs, mercury, tattoos. Electrical exposure through shocks or electrocution, lightning strikes, power lines, antennas, those devices that I just showed you. Biological trauma, so through mold or parasites or Lyme disease. And the 5th one is an impaired immune system, so those of the very young or the elderly. So the key issues to facing those with EHS are support of family and friends, housing, low EMF and EMR housing, medical diagnosis and treatment, recovery from EHS. And Dr. Havas and I created an acronym called R²ID, which includes reducing your exposure, resetting your limbic system, boosting your immune system, and then detoxing. Physiological or psychological, what is EHS? And to advocate and accommodate those who are EHS. And that's what I do at the Electrosensitive Society. So first of all, support. Understanding from your friends and family is really critical. No one chooses to be sensitive, so really being supportive of those who become electrohypersensitive is critical. It can really lead to a lot of self-isolation because when people are sensitive, they have to really reduce their exposure. So interacting with friends who are on cell phones all the time can be problematic. We really need to listen, believe, and support those who are EHS. And at the Electrosensitive Society, we have a weekly support group. So that allows a forum for people to support each other and to get really great information on how to move forward through this. And we have to advocate on behalf of others. One of the issues is that people who are sensitive often can't use a computer. Even a wired computer is problematic for them. So having volunteers Google for them. So I was talking about having a volunteer Googler is a very critical component of the support mechanism. So one barrier to people getting the support that they need is often people think it's a psychological response to things rather than a physiological. So what is the evidence that it's biological? I'm going to present a little bit on live blood analysis, heart rate variability monitoring, and plant growth and Wi-Fi. So for the live blood, we prick a finger, put it on a slide, and look at the slide underneath the microscope. So this is live blood before Wi-Fi exposure. So this is Dr. Magda Havas's blood before she was exposed to Wi-Fi. This is what her blood looks like after a 10 minutes exposure to Wi-Fi. And they call this formation rouleau formation, when the blood cells all stick together like this, rather than being separate and independent as above slide. Dr. Stephen Sinatra says that our blood should be the consistency of red wine. And when it's in rouleau formation, it's actually the consistency of ketchup. So it's all clodgy and stuck together. And it really reduces the ability for it to flow well. And symptoms include headaches, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, heart and blood pressure problems, even heart attack and stroke. Many people with EHS complained of heart palpitations resembling a heart attack. And so this video demonstrates the variability in heart rate in a sensitive individual.
Well, 16 by 9 wanted to test the power of Wi-Fi, so we went to visit environmental scientist Magda Havas from Trent University to do another test. Professor Havas's subject, Martin, who calls himself electrically sensitive, is hooked up to a heart monitor, and Havas sets up a wireless computer.
Well, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking Martin and exposing him to microwave radiation from Wi-Fi, the same type of thing that we have in schools, for example, and just monitoring his heart to see if his heart reacts to any of the radiation. He won't know when things are turned on or off, so it's going to be a blind study in that regard.
With the Wi-Fi plugged in, Martin's heart rate accelerates in mere moments.
Now I can feel something. It's going through my chest. I can feel it down my legs too.
The closer the router is, the greater his reaction.
A few seconds ago, it was like my chest was actually jumping in the middle here.
Then, seconds after the wireless internet is unplugged, just like that, his heart rate slows down. Martin, how are you feeling right now?
Fine, I don't think there's anything on.
But listen to this. Those levels Martin was exposed to, well, they're acceptable according to Safety Code 6. So if they're safe, why was his heart racing? Magda Havas has a theory.
So some percentage of the population is reacting to these microwave radiation at levels well below Safety Code 6.
But I'm not sick from Wi-Fi and I use it all the time.
Well, not everyone has the same sensitivities. We have children who have peanut allergies. We have people who are allergic to pollen. They react to pollen. And it's same with electrical sensitivity. Only a percentage of the population react.
So you can see the whole video on Global 16 by 9, and it was an hour-long segment on Wi-Fi in schools. So how many people in the general population are EHS? It's predicted that 3% of the population have severe symptoms which interfere with their daily function in the presence of electromagnetic fields. 35% of the population is predicted to have moderate symptoms, and many others may be asymptomatic, in which case they don't know that they're sensitive, but their blood or their heart may be reacting. So in Canada, with a population of 38 million, that's 1 million people who have severe sensitivity. In the US, 9.8 million, and in the EU, 15 million people. That's an enormous population that would be sensitive to the electromagnetic radiation. So plants and Wi-Fi, when we expose pea plants to Wi-Fi for 30 days, look at the difference in shoot growth. So the shoots on the left-hand side are the ones that were exposed to Wi-Fi, and the shoots on the right-hand side are the reference. So look at the difference in height. And this is a picture of the root growth. On the left, the root system's entirely absent, and on the right, the control plants have an extensive root system. And this is also a picture of the router. The Wi-Fi router was actually at the location of the red arrow. And you can see the Wi-Fi exposed plants are literally moving away, growing away from the location of the Wi-Fi router, whereas the controls go straight up towards the light. And this is peer-reviewed publication that you can look up. A key issue to those facing electrohypersensitivity is housing. So low EMF, MCS friendly and mold-free housing is absolutely critical. We need to create low EMF areas, cell tower free areas to increase the accessibility, not only for those who need it, but for those of us who want to have a choice in living next to a cell tower or not. Currently, mobile housing is being used with people who are sensitive, and this enables them to move their home away from a new cell tower going up and gives them the freedom to continue to move around. But again, it's very difficult to finally find a place that you're feeling safe and then it being interrupted by a new location of a cell tower. We need to have emergency shelters. Many people who actually find themselves or recently diagnosed with electrohypersensitivity, they actually become homeless in an effort to eliminate and reduce their EMF exposure. So we actually need no EMF or low EMF housing shelters for people in desperate need of them. And for those that become homeless because of their electrohypersensitivity, currently there's many complications with that with COVID, because the showers and the facilities that they depend upon are closed. So they're not even able to utilize that resource. Another key issue facing those with EHS is finding medical help, medical assistance, and finding a doctor who's going to be supportive and aware and educated about EHS, that they need to have treatment, diagnose, and accommodate. So we need to eliminate EMF exposure in these clinics and hospitals and facilities to accommodate those who need it. The ICD code in 2015 brings a legitimacy to those who have this sensitivity and enable them to be accommodated within these different environments. It's really important to create medical alert bracelets or road ID to inform the medical community on how to treat somebody who's EHS by eliminating their exposure when they're brought to the hospital or in an ambulance, for example. And disability, it's been recognized as a disability in Sweden since 2000 as a functional impairment, and in the USA since 2002 under the American Disabilities Act. And EHS has been recognized by the Canadian Human Rights Commission since 2007. And again, we need to use these diagnosis and these treatments to increase the accessibility in a number of different areas, both in their living and working environments. A very important key issue is the recovery. People often ask, can we recover from EHS? And I really feel that they can do an enormous amount to reduce their sensitivity. The first R stands for reducing their electrosmog. It's a critical first step. As equally as important, I think, is resetting the limbic system. And then after the resetting of the limbic system, addressing any toxic thinking or emotional trauma, etc. The next step would be to boost the immune system. And the final one is to detox from chemical, biological, all various sorts of toxins. And the immune system support and the detox, really you need a good medical practitioner to help you with that. So reducing your exposure. There was a lot of information presented at the medical conference. I'll go over it briefly here. You really need to, in order to reduce your exposure, you need to measure it. You need to know what you're exposed to. So either purchasing a meter or enlisting the help of an expert from the Building Biology Institute or some other expert who can help you locate the sources of your electrosmog within your home and living environments, and then how to reduce it. So you really want to measure radio frequency radiation, dirty electricity, electric and magnetic fields. And you also want to measure the light noise, so the flicker, and also blocking out the blue light. So there's different ways to reduce your electromagnetic exposure, and it's a critical first step in the recovery from EHS. And you can Google, you can actually wire all of these mobile devices. And a lot of people want to know exactly how to do it with their device. I find it's because technology is changing so rapidly, it's best to Google how to connect your specific phone to Ethernet. And you can surf the internet, it's faster, there's no radio frequency radiation. And I have some information on my website that tells you step by step how to go through doing that. So resetting the limbic system, there's many different ways. There's one is the dynamic neural retraining system by Annie Hopper, and it's been incredibly effective for many people who have EHS. Another successful option has been Heal from Your Past with Renew Aurora. And then also eliminating trauma using auricular chromotherapy is a trauma treatment that I've recently learned about, and it's phenomenal. It's Dr. Daniel Assis, and he has published it in the Medical Journal of Acupuncture, and it's available online. Great information for how to, it literally eliminates the trauma. So the earlobe, that portion of your ear, is associated with the central nervous system and the limbic area of your brain. And the technique is non-invasive, and it does not require the patient to really share much. So what you do is, we all have this image that brings up the strongest emotion of the trauma, and you ask the individual to bring up that image. And when they bring up that image, there's a portion on their ear with respect to the 1 and the 4 in this photo that is the most sensitive when palpated. And so you tell them to bring up the trauma, and they palpitate the ear to the most sensitive spot. And as they are visualizing that trauma, you shine a LED light on that one area, and it literally deletes the visual associated with that trauma. So the analogy that I'd make is that it literally turns off the faucet so it doesn't keep on reactivating that trauma for you. It's nothing short of miraculous, and I've seen it over and over again, and it's such an incredibly effective treatment for post-traumatic stress or even anxiety disorders and just different types of trauma. And the trauma can be whether you've seen it yourself, where you've witnessed something happening to someone else, or you've just heard about a trauma. So it's incredibly effective at resetting that limbic system. A lot of people who have EHS get stuck in flight or fight, both on a physiological level as well as a psychological component. And stuck in that flight or fight really needs to be, your limbic system needs to be brought back online and not stuck in flight or fight. And you can look at Dr. Assis's website for more information, asisdolor.com.ar from Argentina. Once any traumas have been treated and eliminated, the toxic thinking also has to be addressed. One needs to shift from a limiting mindset to a more healthy and accurate one. To address this change in thinking, I suggest a combination of 3 authors. Much of our thinking and self-talk comes from our childhood experiences, and Dr. Brené Brown is a PhD researcher who argues that being vulnerable, long perceived as weakness, was actually an act of courage and the true path to connection with others. Her book, The Gifts of Imperfections, talks about us embracing our imperfections rather than hiding them. And her entertaining books and podcasts and TED Talks and a movie on Netflix uses humor, and her approach is refreshing and incredibly thought-provoking. Dr. Shefali Tasbury and her parenting book, The Awakened Family, it provides insights about how we were parented, Those constant helpful corrections that we received from our parents and teachers and other well-meaning adults were daily messages that we were never quite enough. And Dr. Tasbury helps determine how that negative self-talk originated, and just that awareness of it really allows you to let it go. Finally, Nicola Bird provides an unusual but incredibly effective approach at eliminating anxiety. The analogy she uses is one of a snow globe. With all of the white flakes floating around when you shake the snow globe, they represent our anxious thoughts. In order to have those anxious thoughts stop, we stop shaking the snow globe. We learn to not take our thinking so seriously and do nothing about the thinking. Less is always more. Another example she uses is to imagine our anxious thoughts as the equivalent of a New York City cab. They just show up whether we've ordered them or not. And the anxious thought, or the taxi cab, wants you to get in. And you let it go. You just say no thanks and you let it go. Understanding the nature of our thought allows us to ignore anxious thinking and realize that we're actually not our thinking. We don't have to take the thought seriously and do something about it. We can just let it go. It's an incredibly effective approach to anxiety. Another key issue facing those with EHS is how to accommodate them, both within a hospital, a school, and public spaces. We've had great success in having patients accommodated in Ontario hospitals. Here's a case study of a 67-year-old female with severe EHS and MCS, so multiple chemical sensitivity, who needed radiation and chemotherapy treatment for cancer. She needed to stay in the hospital for 5 weeks, and we created a low EMF environment for her. First thing we did was contact the patient experience office and provide them with information on how to accommodate somebody with EHS and MCS. Then we measured and reduced the electromagnetic exposure. Attention was given to key areas within the hospital, including the entrance, admitting, elevators, cancer clinic, and inpatient room. A local building biologist was literally on call and measured numerous times to ensure a low EMF environment. And we worked with hospital IT department and security to turn off Wi-Fi access points. Personal wireless devices of doctors and nurses were turned off or left at the nurse's station away from the EHS patient. Due to the inability to eliminate the radio frequency completely, we needed to install an RF blocking canopy within the patient's room. And this canopy was installed by the hospital maintenance staff. Dirty electricity was also filtered in her room. And communication with the patient and as well as the whole team was key prior to her arrival at the hospital and when she was at the facility, as she had limited phone access and didn't have access to internet. Working with the director of the cancer clinic, doctors, nurses, technicians, security, and maintenance staff, we were able to achieve very low electromagnetic levels within the hospital. And now we have this RF blocking canopy as part of a kit available for others to use. And hospital administrators are very keen to share this learning experience with other hospitals in Ontario and elsewhere. And additionally, they are recommending their health and safety departments purchase handheld electrosmog meters to monitor the hospital environment. And details on actually how to accommodate somebody within the hospital setting are available on the Electrosensitive Society website.
Which page, how would we find that on the electrosensitivity website?
Thank you. It's under solutions.
Uh-huh.
Yep. And it just says how to accommodate someone with EHS.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you. In schools, we have hardwired schools for internet access. We find it's incredibly effective to give a meter to the teacher. And that meter becomes the accommodator, or the little reminder that they need to turn something off. Because there's nothing worse than a child already feeling sensitive and overwhelmed about them being different. So the meter itself becomes the accommodator. So you turn it on, you get everybody to turn everything off, and then you just leave it on in the little noise function. If somebody does turn their device on, the meter reminds them that they need to turn it off, not the teacher or not the individual that's sensitive. So I find it's an incredibly effective tool, especially in a university or a college setting, but also in a younger child's school. And again, you need to focus both on the entranceways, the different places, like they have to get to their classroom. So it's the classroom itself, but also the entranceways, et cetera. And again, turning off the power and turning down the routers. So we've been successful at really minimizing exposure for those who are EHS. And sometimes the routers can be turned down to function only at 16%, and they actually find they work better at that lower power. And having accessible public spaces is critical. Again, just like we have accommodated smoking with non-smoking, we want to have Wi-Fi free areas. And there's libraries and health food stores, both here in Peterborough and in Barrie, a number of different communities. They have Wi-Fi free times where people who are EHS can go and shop and visit. Wi-Fi free Wednesdays at Sobeys. There's a number of resorts that I'm working with to create digital detox weeks. So they're going to have a full week. You're not allowed to actually bring your phone. So not only is it just digital detox, but it allows people who are electro-hypersensitive to attend those environments. And they're using it as a selling tool because we're all so connected and people just want to be disconnected for a bit and recharge. And hotels and hospitals, I remember years ago in New York City, they had the first non-smoking restaurants. And I thought, gosh, imagine, like that'll never happen. And now look, it's everywhere. So New York has cell phone free restaurants. And so they're leading the charge again, just like they did with the smoking. And again, dentists, chiropractors, all healthcare professionals, different people really need to be able to accommodate. And that's one thing that I do. I actually phone the facility and teach them how to eliminate their exposure. And so people that are EHS can visit their facilities and not be sick afterwards. So we really have a due diligence to provide accessible infrastructure. So it's the responsibility of communities, particularly here in Ontario. We have, through the Ontarios with Disability Act, we want to have a fully accessible Ontario by 2025, and that includes the environmentally induced disabilities. So again, it's not the individual that's disabled, it's the environment that's actually disabling the person. So we have to treat the environment, that's critical. And we need to provide cell tower free areas. So one thing that we've been doing that's been really, really successful, I think, is working with the accessibility committees within the city councils, because they already know how to accommodate disabilities. So we're just putting that information of the electro-hypersensitivity as a disability into their already existing framework. And so it's been very, very effective. And as you know, we have an accessible Peterborough electromagnetic hypersensitivity tip sheet on how to accommodate somebody at City Hall here in Peterborough who is EHS. And again, you achieve that by turning off the Wi-Fi, disabling the individual's cell phones and wireless devices, and providing internet access through shielded Ethernet cable and fiber optics. So we still have 100% connectivity, it's just through wires. And these documents, again, I was talking about when I talk to city halls, I want to bring the solutions. I identify that there's a need, and these are the solutions to address the need for having wired technology. So connecting communities with fiber optics, that last mile is critical right up to the residents. And where you site your cell towers, looking at it from an accommodations component and accessibility component is critical in accommodating the location of these towers. So you have areas within your communities that are low EMF. And again, Dr. Timothy Shackley's book, Reinventing Wires, is a critical read for all of these communities to learn how to wire their communities safely. The advocacy in Canada, Frank Clegg, the former president of Microsoft, has been instrumental in bringing awareness to Canadians about the risks associated with wireless technology. And most recently in May of 2020, he brought forth the 5G appeal with an urgent appeal to the government of Canada to suspend the 5G rollout and to choose safe and reliable fiber connections. And this is a list of the different groups that helped him with that advocacy of just saying that we really need to wire this technology. We need to have connectivity. It's nothing like that. We need to have those rural communities having fiber optics as well. And finally, this is the website, my website, Electrosensitive Society. And we're currently in the process of having 2 organizations that are going to support those who are EHS that can receive taxable donation receipts with money or property. We really need to start to support those with EHS through finding and creating them safe places where they can go and providing them some financial support when they can't support themselves, because so many of them are on disability and that kind of thing. So that's it.
Wow, thank you so much for moving that, all of those pieces together. I mean, I'm really impressed with so many pieces to this that I'd like to ask you about. So how were you successful in, or how was the person at the hospital able to get that accommodation? Because we have many experiences here in the United States. People are accommodated sometimes at the local level, and sometimes when they try to get accommodations, they're not able to. What do you recommend to people?
First of all, I'd be happy to help them. So contact me. What I do is I go in through the patient experience office and I work with them. And so I don't ever, convince them that they need to be accommodated. That's a given, right? It would be if you had diabetes, you would be having something. If you were in a wheelchair, you would be accommodated, so I don't ever convince them that they need to be accommodated. I just talk with them about that I have a patient who needs the accommodation, and I provide them with solutions on how to do that. So I work through the patient experience office, and then we often connect with the doctor, either the doctor that has referred them to the hospital or the doctor within the hospital itself. With this accommodation for the 5 weeks, I had numerous conversations with the physicians and the whole team. We had on-site visits, numerous ones. We created, like I was saying, a pathway. We had a specific entrance that she was brought in and out of, which was a security issue because security had to be involved. So there were a lot of moving parts, and they were incredibly responsive at accommodating her. So it was a real success story. Again, it's not always that way. I have tried to accommodate people in the past, and sometimes with different authorities. Again, people don't know about what EHS is, and people tend to say no when they don't know how to do something. So I come with the how to do it, and then I actually help them do it, like in person or over the phone, or find the people that can. So I've been successful at having people accommodated in the States as well, with visiting doctors' offices and hospital visits, particularly to emerge.
How about schools? Because I know that I've heard of elementary schools and middle schools in Canada that are doing accommodations, but I've also heard challenges related to high schools. And I know that's an issue here in the United States as well. Can you tell me about accommodating children in high school?
We've had moderate success with that. Also, what I've worked with probably more than children themselves is the actual teachers in different situations that need accommodation. I've found it's very school board specific, because there have been places where children were accommodated within a school setting, and then they got a new principal, and the new principal wasn't aware of what that accommodation might look like, or etc. And so then they would pull back the accommodation. And so we would try and get it reinstated. Again, I find that it's really a lot to do with the education component. They have doctor's notes, they have medical documentation for this medical need that they need to be accommodated for. So I always go through that. It's a medical accommodation. It would be very similar to, they administer puffers for kids with asthma at school. They wouldn't ever say, no, Johnny can't have his inhaler for his asthma. I think of it's very similar to that. So I've gone past the trying to convince them that there's a need for it. The need's already taken care of for the medical accommodation. I just show up and say, this is what they need. How are we going to go about doing it?
I'm trying to pull up a recent article that just happened where a school board in Canada refused actually to have Dr. Davis present. And what the school board member, I'll find it in a second, but the school board member had raised the issue of long-term impacts from all of this Wi-Fi in school. Can you speak to that and what schools are doing in Canada and what people can do on this issue? And I'm going to pull that up for a second too.
It's a good question. Again, it's that awareness piece, it's that education. It's that knowledge transfer. A number of private schools have been wiring their technology in schools here in Ontario, in particular, some in other parts of Canada.
Mhm.
But again, it's educating that principal, and it's much easier in a private school setting. There's a number
Right.
of private schools that have been very successful at removing all wireless components. One of the schools that I helped locally, they had the wireless component because that's how their printer worked. And so once we just ran the Ethernet cables to the printers and showed them that they could print wired, it solved the issue, and they went completely wired. So it's very, very difficult because it is a need. We need to be wiring schools. The science is there. The documentation that it should is much better for children being more sensitive. It's all available. But again, people, and it's a combination. Like I thought I had Dr. Havas present to my own children's school board years ago, and I just thought once they were aware of the potential risks that they wouldn't even hesitate to wire everything. But it didn't work out that way. And I think that there was some miscommunication. A lot of people think that you're saying no to internet rather than just to the wireless component of internet, that the wired component is much more secure and faster and better. So I think there was a miscommunication or a misunderstanding of that portion. I think too, it's so difficult right now because everything is really associated around fear, and especially with COVID and all that kind of stuff. It's not a fearful thing. It is a toxin, just like any other toxin, and you should just be minimizing it. So once you start thinking of EMF and EMR as being a toxin, you would obviously want to reduce any exposure to it, but we don't think of it as being a toxin until we need to.
Well, the news article is radiation risk to Central Okanagan students presentation rejected. And the school trustees, a school board member or trustee, we have a different
Yes.
wording here in the United States, brought forward, let's have Dr. Davis come and speak. Now, we have spoken at school boards and fully expected that there'd be an industry representative there as well. I've done that many times. But they actually rejected the idea completely and, did the usual stating that, that this is fringe or that it's not the accepted reality, that there's science showing harm and so forth. And I know that I'm involved in many school issues at various levels, from the local, state to federal, and getting that information out there so people can see all the facts is really one of the first hurdles, because I find in schools, it really does come down to what you're talking about. Like, you got to be in the school and see how the kids are being educated and what do the teachers need. The way I see it is, what do you need and when, and let's solve all those problems and get you what you need with the least amount of exposure to wireless radiation as possible. And every situation I've seen, I don't see any, it's solvable. It's fixable, but you really have to say to each individual teacher, so how did the kids sit? What are you teaching? Could we look at the kids sitting this way? Or what do you think about it going along that wall? Or all of these like conversations that have to happen. But the only way to get to those conversations is to have the door open to where you can actually have the conversation. And many parents are finding the door closed on them when they raise this issue, as was exemplified in the school district, the school board meeting, where they didn't even let Dr. Davis in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I find that too, because again, we're trying to actually work together. We're actually
Right.
trying to do what's best for our children. All of those people that are saying no care about their children.
I know.
So we have to bridge the gap somewhere. And it's the same in the hospital. They were saying, oh, well, it's impossible. And I was like, I know it's impossible, but if we were going to do it, how would we start? And it's that working together. And like you're saying, how do you actually get to work together if they just keep the door shut and say, no, there's no problem? Yeah, it's, and again, I think that there are some examples that are starting, and a lot of the chiropractors or dentists or naturopathic physicians that I work with, once they actually wire their facility to accommodate those with EHS, they feel so much better in their own environment, working environment. They don't have the same headaches. They don't have the same issues. They actually feel better. So they actually stay wired and stay low EMF all the time for their own well-being, even though they started doing it because they were trying to accommodate somebody.
Right. You know, that brings us to workplace exposures, something that I think every government around the world needs to be addressing, because people do not have a choice about their exposure and are in very vulnerable situations, especially our retail worker, bus drivers, and so forth. Can you talk about what's happening in Canada related to occupational exposures?
I help a lot of employers accommodate their employees. So again, it's not a discussion about whether it has to be happening or not. It's that they have medical documentation. So the medical community is key here, because once you get the medical documentation, that this is a requirement. It's not just a fringe request. It's a medical requirement. And then providing them with easy options on how to do that, how to wire the mobile devices, how to set up little nodes of communication. It's the actual logistics. Once you make all of that easier and easier and easier, people say, oh, okay. So it's that ease component. There was one school in Ontario where they took it to the kids and they said, you guys research it. You guys research the health effects. You guys research how to do it. You guys research the economics involved, the speed, the quality, all that kind of stuff. And so when you look at it as a package like that, the risks definitely are larger than the no risk. So again, even if people say that it wouldn't be as bad as they think, or, you know, it's not going to cause all the problems that it has been documented to cause, there's no risk at wiring the technology. There's no risk at reducing the exposure. So that's why I've never really understood it. It's like, you know, we make cars safer by using seatbelts, by having speed limits, by doing ride checks. We don't stop driving the cars completely, but we make them as safe as possible. So I think that there's a lot of access that's needed through through internet access, but not through wireless. We need it to be safer through wired.
I know. I agree with you 100%. There's no downside to reducing exposure, especially in light of the hundreds of doctors who are independent, who are calling to minimize exposure to as much as possible. And now with 5G and satellites and all of these new exposures that are being built right now, as well as being proposed, it does seem quite overwhelming to many people. And I think that having hope and understanding that there are so many solutions here to what we're being presented with as the only way, that wireless is the only way, or that everything must go wireless. It's so for everyone listening, I know it feels like an overwhelming, like, how are we going to fix this? But when you start digging in and just start going, okay, let's start here. 1, 2, 3. There's just so many ways to fix this situation. I mean, I think about like phones, like, why can't every phone be fully capable of doing everything it can do wired? And why don't they come without, we don't need an adapter. Like right now we have to go online. Like you said, we have to figure out what's the right adapter for my make and model. To me, this is something that needs to be fixed. You shouldn't have to be the FBI to figure out the right adapter for your phone so that you can have no radiation in your home.
Absolutely. I agree. And again, they've put warnings on the phones, as you know, to keep them away from your body. And when you do plug it in, putting it on a little stand, using a stylus. And when I say plug it in, I meant connecting to Ethernet. So plugging it in, and you can surf the internet, you can chat, you can do all of those things. Because again, I really see this being critical. That's right. Exactly.
This is an Ethernet.
Exactly. And just plugging it right in. and then measuring it, getting a meter, you know, that you can measure the presence and absence of the wireless radiation. And again, it's those high school students, it's those kids that want to still be connected, but that they don't have to risk the wireless component and making themselves sick in the process. So there are so many ways to minimize it. And just, it's that awareness. You know, it's interesting, in the last 10 years ago, I never saw somebody holding their phone out and talking on speakerphone ever. And now I would say at least half the people I see use their phone and speakerphones. Like when we used to be able to go to an airport, I would check, and there would be about half the people were using their phone on speakerphone. It's a brand new response for people. So, you know, we can learn how to do these things safely. So when you're traveling, and you absolutely need to have that mobile component for emergencies, for sure. But if you're not traveling, if you're not mobile, you should have these little docking stations that everything's all plugged in, and you plug in your device, you put it on airplane mode and turn the antennas off of Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and your cellular. And it's easy. It's just habit changing that people can learn how to do it.
Right. I often think of, like, with phones, if they came with the default being all the antennas are off. So then that's just how they were, unless you made that decision to turn them on. That would just make sense. Kids in college, I mean, let's talk about college dorms. I'm finding that, having a child who's in college now and having visited a lot of colleges, that a lot of places actually have Ethernet ports in the new bedrooms, except for those new builds that just happened. They are not actually fully wired, and that's something that has to be fixed. Everything should just be wired with all the new builds. But all these old buildings that have the dorms, they can accommodate having Ethernet connections, and so that when kids are in their dorm, it's, you know, they're like 10 feet by 10 feet. Do you have to be walking? I mean, even if you can walk around with a long wire, it's unnecessary to have radiation in that room. There can be a phone and a laptop that is hardwired. And something that I wish existed easier, and someone, you know about this, but that you can take a cell phone, Ethernet connected, well, we have to use an adapter now, but into the laptop, which is also Ethernet connected itself, so that if you only have one Ethernet port, you don't have to get a port switch at that point, which a lot of people feel is overwhelming, even though it's really quite simple to get. But I didn't know, what you've been doing in college dorms on this issue.
And yes, and that there's a little video on my website, the Electrosensitive Society, doing exactly that, plugging it into the computer.
Mhm.
But you have to charge your phone anyway. So like you're saying, bring that Ethernet connection to the laptop, and then using that as your wired hub for your phone or your iPad or all of your other devices. So it's critical. And there's a little video on my website showing you the RF and no RF as well. At colleges, we have an accommodation policy at one of the local colleges, and it's critical because, again, I sent the teacher the meter,
Mhm.
and that was in the classrooms and stuff. At the college level and at the university level, depends on the building structure, but the buildings, when they're that really thick cement, we've
Right.
actually been really easily accommodating people who are EHS in those dormitory settings,
Right.
because you put them on an outside wall, and it's actually really quite simple to accommodate them and eliminate the electromagnetic fields or wireless fields. And then you filter for dirty electricity and just measure the electric and the magnetic and increase your distance, because that distance is always your friend, keeping it away from your body as much as possible. Not keeping those laptops on your lap, putting them on a table, putting them on a really big thick pillow with a, there's different, you want to increase your distance from it. There was a woman, when I was working with Dr. Magda Havas in one of her classes, and she was saying how she was having so many symptoms of having the laptop on her lap. She actually stopped menstruating. And once she stopped using the wireless devices on her lap and stuff and got them away from her body, her cycles came back. So it's amazing the different types of impacts that these kids are having, and they are really bombarded with it. So sleeping in that environment that's clean, turning absolutely everything off, putting it on a timer if you have to, because a lot of people will say, oh, there's no way I can deal with not having Wi-Fi. Well, even just putting it on a timer that it shuts off at a certain time and comes on in the morning in a family, because there's different needs for people. Again, it's always trying to make it easy. It's making it easy for the group and coming up with solutions, minimizing it as much as possible and eliminating it wherever you can. But sometimes it's a combination of the two.
Right. And let's go back to the cement walls, because that's, I think, really important, because it can be quite protective. But the challenge is that in schools and in places with cement walls, because the Wi-Fi is not moving around the building as much, there's antennas and routers, access points being placed in every room. So I've been to some dorm rooms for kids where they literally have right there, right, 3 feet from the bed, right, well, actually just right on the wall, they have those routers in every room, because it's the only way to get the signal in there. And I can't help but think, well, and parents are trying to get some shift on this, but what keeps coming back when the parents say, you have a transmitting antenna in my child's room, my child will use an Ethernet, I don't need that, can we just keep that port active and turn off the antenna? They say FCC says that it's safe, and we cannot do that, even though we're paying for this, private school with college tuition, and they're paying for that dormitory room. So, and that's when, so there's people who are getting medical accommodations and have been successful, some that have not, and they're taking legal action. And then there are all the people who are trying to reduce exposure because it is toxic, and they don't want their kids exposed or themselves exposed for all of this time, which is unnecessary, because it could all be wired.
Mm-hmm. And it depends on what the kid, I find, following their lead, what they want. But I've helped a lot of people create little cases, just like the smart guard shields that you have covering the smart guard, or sorry, the smart meters. I've created those little shields covering the router. So you actually just block it out, and you can use RF blocking fabric, you can use metal. There's different types of fabric that you can use that you create a little block around it. And because it's surrounded by all that cement and the concrete, it dissipates really quite readily if you block it. So again, you have to measure it before and after. You can't just assume that you're minimizing your exposure, because sometimes people blocking stuff actually increases it.
Right.
So you have to measure it before and after. But you can block those signals. And we've had other people that are quite talented, and they've just put it on a switch. So you just turn it off like a light switch. You turn it on and the router comes on, and then you turn it off. So again, it's that education piece. They always talk about, oh, they're all like a mesh network. You can't just take one out of it. It doesn't work that way. It does. They don't want to do it, and they're not used to doing it, and they don't sometimes know how to do it. So if you override those factors, make it easy. This is just prudent practice. What I have been successful at getting new builds wired is that there are some precedents where people have been accommodated for their EHS, and the population numbers are predicted to increase because we have so much exposure. And so at different times, school boards, hospitals, different environments are going to be legally obligated to accommodate those people with EHS. Maybe not today, but next year, the year after, next month. And so you want to have an infrastructure, a wired infrastructure, that you can easily accommodate somebody with EHS. So in all of those new builds, you need to have Ethernet cabling. You need to keep those wires in, because you're going to be legally required to accommodate it. And trying to retrofit that and do that after the new builds, it's so much more difficult. So the other thing that they've had success in is that in some of the dormitories and some of the schools, with all the wireless devices being utilized for particularly banking transactions, they're not secure. So there's actually, I think it was in Wisconsin, there was a college that they actually wired everything because they had so much fraud and so many disruptions financially, because everybody's private information was so vulnerable because of their Wi-Fi network. So there are so many reasons, particularly at a university setting, why you should be wired.
That's right. There's a paper that I was a co-author with Frank Clegg and Meg Sears of Prevent Cancer Now on building science and radiofrequency radiation, what makes smart and healthy buildings, and Dr. Anthony Miller, as well as
Rob Metzinger.
yes, Rob Metzinger. And I think, one of the things that's addressed in that paper is the liability issue, as well as what building, how to reduce radiofrequency radiation in buildings, and how there's been a substantial body of research showing effects at levels much lower than what your safety limits or safety code 6 or FCC limits allow, and the critical need for buildings to have this infrastructure in place. I mean, to me, it's just the low-hanging fruit. If you're building a building, have that infrastructure in so you can easily plug in, because it's coming. This is the future. The future will be wired. It will not be wireless. And with wireless, we're always having to, industry's always coming out with new products. You have to upkeep it, licensing fees, all of these things that are constantly needing to be replaced. Whereas if you have good wires in your building, it's not the same kind of complicated equipment that always needs to be replaced every time there's a new this and new that. You just plug it in, and it's also uses less energy.
Totally. And there's been an argument when we were educating about Wi-Fi in schools that it was an excessive, not an equality issue, that these more remote communities, they needed to have wireless because they needed to have access as well. So again, it's that proximity piece. Sometimes in these remote places, they may need to have a wireless hub or tower or something, but you don't locate children next to it. You don't locate vulnerable populations. You keep it away from people. So it's that proximity piece that's critical. So you wire it from those sources closer to people. Because again, there's some arguments there about that equality. You can still have protective measures and be equitable and have access for all, reducing the exposure and increasing the speed and increasing accessibility on all levels.
Right. In the United States, they're doing things like having school buses or public school buses be transmitters, almost like they're cell towers, moving cell towers, or in library parking lots, they're putting in antennas for people who don't have access. But this is not looking at the whole picture, because what's needed is people who don't have access need that modem with that wired access, which is faster. They should not be going to parking lots to access the internet. They should have it in their home. And if they don't, governments really need to be asking why. Why don't people have access? And we're finding when you evaluate the lack of access, there's different reasons that are really locally based. They're really different depending on where you live in your situation. And they require a solution which is based on the situation, not just more antennas. So, for example, some people in apartment buildings in very dense areas where you have every kind of service available, the issue is frankly that they need the money. They need to be able to afford to get that service that people in residential areas who have higher income have, of course, consider it just what they always pay, like a utility. And people simply can't afford that. Or their apartment building only has one option, and it's very high. It's like a package of TV and this and that and all of these things, and it's just impossible to pay. So people are relying on their cell phones, which is really unfortunate, because when you're in a building, as you know, and you're accessing your cell phone, even if the service is good outside, sometimes the bars are low inside, and then your phone is going to be outputting more wireless radiation at a very intense area, to part of your body. So we are advocating for everyone to have access, but access does not mean wireless. This is like exactly what you talked about. It's like something we have to help educate people about, is that, I used to think Wi-Fi was internet, but it's not necessarily. It doesn't have to be. And the problem is many young people now, when we start talking like this, we might as well be talking another language, because they were raised on phones. They were raised on Wi-Fi. They don't even know what an Ethernet is. But I mean, I do. I remember dial-up. I remember when it was the phone line and then the Ethernet. And I knew what life was like to pick someone up at the airport without a phone. And that's what I've been doing these days. I mean, I don't have the phone on in the car. I don't have the phone on really. I haven't used my phone in actually weeks now. And I like the piece of doing something without always being interrupted. It was interrupting me. I mean, radiation aside, I remember being highly irritated all the time by my phone that was always ringing and dinging at me before I learned about this issue.
Mhm, mhm.
I found it quite disruptive, and I'm thankful to live with less interruptions because of the lifestyle choices that I've made and been privileged to make in my home. Because some of these, this, like this for the iPhone, for when I have, their teenagers that visit our house and they want to use their phone and we don't have phones in our house. It's $100. So who can afford this? People who want to make changes go, $100, like it's outrageous.
Mhm. And that the accessibility piece is true. Like a lot of these people, they become debilitated and they lose their job. So they're on disability because they're so compromised. And then they sometimes lose their home. So they're homeless. How do they have access to anything? Like when I was talking about that Googling help, just having somebody volunteer to Google for people who can't use a computer, who can't use these mobile devices. Like how do we include those in our accessibility planning? It's so important, and working with those communities and those cities and those provinces, creating low EMF zones, having people, that's why the charities are so important, because we need to create these zones of low EMF, whether people can donate property, whether people can raise funds to buy different properties. There's the Safe Home Limited in Green Bank, West Virginia. They have a new non-for-profit organization that they're accepting funds, and they already don't have the radio frequency radiation. So let's build on that and create these safe zones for people. Like I have people every single day contacting me from all over the world saying, you would too, where can I go? I'm sensitive to all this stuff and there's nowhere to go. Help me. I'm desperate. I need somewhere to go. So we need to create these zones for people that desperately need it, but also want to, like you're saying, that privilege, like we're privileged to lower our EMF exposure, to create these safe spaces for ourselves. What about the people that can't do it for themselves? So we need to work together and help those people that are in such dire straits. And particularly with COVID, it's absolutely impossible for them.
Right. Well, we are contacted as well, and I wish we had better answers, and that's why we're working at the policy, at the federal level to address these issues, because it's just a tragedy.
It is. And
And
anybody who contacts you that needs to talk to somebody one-on-one on that personal level of trying to get help, and what do they do and where do they go and who do they talk to, I'm happy to help them. So send them to me.
Great. Do you do workshops? Because I was thinking about the importance of having conversations. For example, let's start with educators, just to begin to troubleshoot, to talk about those solutions more in depth. So for example, I was just imagining a teacher saying, here's my classroom, and we can do this by Zoom, right? Here's my classroom, here's my setup. What do I do and how do I do it? This kind of hands-on delivery of information. We have a lot on our website, but really we need like that ongoing communication, discussion would be great. Do you do things like that?
Absolutely. And getting a building biologist to come and brainstorm about that, because there's a logistical side, there's an information technology side. That's why when we were doing it at the hospital, we had security, we had the IT person, we had the physician, we had the nurse. And it was interesting. We were and we started at a cancer treatment clinic because we needed to use that. But they're already set up to deal with the ionizing radiation in those areas. So
Right.
they're really good places to start with trying to accommodate somebody with EHS, because they have the blocks, like the infrastructure of the building material is excellent. But we were in the CT scanning area and trying to eliminate the exposure. Well, somebody had a Fitbit on.
Right.
Turned their phones off. Everybody left them all out, and we still kept on getting a signal. And they're like, no, 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 everything's off. So one of the nurses had a Fitbit on. So again, it's that little attention to details. But working through a classroom would be wonderful, because I think there's quite a bit a teacher alone can do, even if they don't have the support of the school. It's obviously much more helpful if they do have the support, but there's so many things, like you're saying, locating their desk spaces and all sorts of stuff. So there's things that they can do to minimize it.
And also even just, I mean, I'm finding that like the Fitbit and all of these, there's new, and because I'm not out in the real world, well, certainly with COVID, we're not all out like we used to be, but there's all these new devices that, we might not even be aware someone has, like watches and just all of these things. It's almost like you could pick apples off a tree with people and their devices that they have, and just this, that, the other. And it's the meter that brings that awareness. And because of the sound on the meter, like I can tell, okay, that's a Bluetooth. They have something on that's Bluetooth that we need to address. And I think if people, when they start to realize that their Fitbit or things they bought to help them, that they're just always radiating them unnecessarily. I mean, it could be on airplane mode. It does not have to be on radiating all the time.
And make sure that when you're buying those personal devices, those rings or those bracelets or those items, that they collect your information to help you with your well-being, but they do it on airplane mode. Because a lot of them will then only download for a bit when they're not on airplane mode, but when they're on your body, they're always in airplane mode. Some people who are electrosensitive wouldn't even be able to do that, but it's that awareness piece. It's like anything next to you needs to be in airplane mode or off.
Right. And the other thing, going to the airplane mode, which needs to be airplane mode with antennas off now, because now some of the newest devices, you put it on airplane mode, it still has Bluetooth on or cellular on or hotspot on. And, I'd like to be able to give simple instructions. I'm sure you would too. Just like, do this.
When you take airplane mode off, all of the antennas come off again, unless you go through and turn them off. So it's
Right.
it's so complicated for people. And that's the thing, like you're saying, trying to make it as easy as possible
Right.
on continuing that conversation, and having people, that's what the weekly support group is so helpful with too, is because they come up with different things that have helped them, but then it's like this brainstorming, this sharing of information. Oh, well, what do you do about this? Or what do you do about that? So it's helpful too for a lot of people.
That's good. I think also the extremely low frequency fields, the magnetic fields, are important for people to be aware of. So I'll have people who turn the wireless off and the Bluetooth off. They finally got that down, but they're putting it on their body unaware that there's a magnetic field as well, which is why they always need to be on a table. You always need to have devices, any electronics, anything that uses energy, should be on a table, not on the body. Cell phones too, they should be off if they're in your pocket or against your body, not on,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because of that.
And it's interesting too, is that fine balance of minimizing and eliminating. And the more you minimize and eliminate, I think the less problems you have in the future. So maybe people don't really feel like doing it now, but again, reducing your exposure now can really save you from doing more drastic measures in the future at times. So it's that practical, scientific, calm approach, not a fearful mode, because people say, oh my gosh, this is so scary. It's not scary at all. You just need to be aware of it, and easy steps on how to minimize your exposure. And there's tips to electromagnetic hygiene on my website. And I know you have so many great examples of how to reduce your exposure, how to create a safe office and workspace. And, again, not getting caught up in the hysteria of it or anything, but just practical reduction steps And
Right.
dirty electricity is another thing that people should be reducing. But again, it's sometimes complicated for people. Anything electronic produces dirty electricity. So, but again, it's like you're saying, do the low hanging fruit first, do the simple measures that are going to
Right.
work easily, and just keep on doing it, and then have it verified by an expert, you know, because that's the thing that I often have people do, is do what they can on their own, starting there, and then have it verified, because there are sometimes things that a novice or a new person to this field would miss. So it's critical to be aware but not afraid.
Absolutely. I was thankful when I learned about this. I thought, what? I mean, even though there are times when I felt like overwhelmed, but I was so thankful to know. It was like, oh, now I know. And what got me to taking steps even further, this was about a decade ago when I first learned about it, was reading the research looking at the hours of cumulative exposure, and sort of understanding, okay, so if at 1,640 hours, a cell phone to the head, you're going to have increased risk of brain cancer, or Dr. Moskowitz, another Korean scientist, just published a review looking at 17 minutes a day for 10 years that is increasing our risk. Well, it just makes sense and is so simple to reduce exposure whenever possible. And it turns out there's so many ways we can do that. I mean, tips and tricks that as you get into it and as you educate yourself, it's just like you wake up in the morning, and what you do in the morning getting ready, it's just sort of what you do. Even when I travel and I'm in situations, there's so many things that I can do to reduce exposure, like even turning the wireless off, working on offline as much as possible, or finding ports in the hosp in the hotel business area, for example, and then I'll just download everything I need to, and then work on my own. So um, there's a lot that can be done, but really we need education and awareness. So your website again, can you give us the URL?
www.electrosensitivesociety.com.
Great, thank you so much. And do you have anything coming up that we should know about?
Not that it's top of my head. I'm presenting to city councils regularly.
Mm-hmm.
I have 3 of those in the next month. But what I do too is I do a 10-minute presentation, a delegation, and I'm happy to do this in any city council anywhere. I've done them in the States as well as in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And I just do a 10-minute delegation, and it's specifically on accommodating EHS, somebody with EHS. So I have the individual in the community set my 10-minute delegation up, and I go and I present 10 minutes, and I do it virtually. Like, that's one thing with COVID, is I can go to a lot of different city councils. We've approached one city council here in Ontario to create an EMF shelter. So exactly what I was talking about in my talk,
Mm-hmm.
To create an EMF shelter. So them donating one of their buildings that they own, and us converting it into an EMF shelter. And so I present to city communities. I work with the riding representatives through C4ST here in Canada, but I'm happy to do it anywhere in the States. Again, I had a woman accommodated a physiotherapist office in Massachusetts last week. So again, I just help people become accommodated wherever they live, work, or need to get medical care, or dental offices. And then I often, once I work with that community or that individual, I advertise then that they provide the option of accommodating people who are EHS. So it's an inclusivity. So people are actually eager to participate in becoming inclusive, right? Like it's an accessibility component. And so
Right.
it takes all of the convincing out of the equation, and it's such a different response. So before, I used to present to city council, and they would say, thank you for your information, next. And now they ask me an hour of questions, and they want to know more for an entire hour. So I'm happy to do that anywhere anybody would like me to do.
Fabulous. So now they can reach you. I guess I would say in the United States, we often have 2 to 3 minutes to present to councils, unless the council calls for a presentation, of which is quite challenging to happen here in the United States, I have to say. How do you end up with a full 10 minutes or a longer presentation?
I've always asked for 10 minutes, and I think that's kind of the standard. But the other thing that I do is I go in through the accessibility committee. So
Mhm.
it's a subsection of the city council. So the accessibility committee should give you 10 minutes.
I see. Great. And do you have any of those online?
They actually, quite a few of them have recorded it, and they've posted it on their different websites. So yeah, there's quite a few of them online now.
That's great. I'd love it if you could send us some of those so we can share them as well. That's so important. I think once people see that it's already been done, it's happening. This is how things are moving forward. Then they have more courage to begin to address this issue and move past the industry messaging that there is no electromagnetic sensitivity and so forth, and just get into accommodating people and having safe spaces for people to live, play, work, and be.
Absolutely. And they deserve accommodation because the environment is creating this problem for them. So we have to modify the environment. And I work together, and I get working groups through the city to then address it. So it's not just an information sharing, it's the start of an action item for that accessibility committee, because they would want to provide access to their community members.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.